The car was not moving. That's the funniest part. Salomondrin's $3 million McLaren Senna was just sitting there in a Beverly Hills parking lot, probably trying to look cool for the valet guys. Then smoke started pouring from the rear. Not a little oops, my bad smoke. This was full-on call the fire department and maybe an exorcist smoke. The video went viral instantly because nothing gets clicks like watching a billionaire's hypercar turn into a very expensive barbecue. This was not some track day mishap. This was a car failing at its most basic job, not catching on fire while parked. Everyone saw it. The question was not if McLaren had a problem. The question was how many other Sennas were just waiting for their turn to become a metal marshmallow. To understand how we got to a parking lot inferno, you have to go back to Ron Dennis's grand vision. This was supposed to be McLaren's ultimate tribute to Ayrton Senna. Naming a car after a racing legend who died pushing the limits was not just marketing, it was putting the entire company's reputation on the line. The pressure was insane. Their solution was to build the most extreme, track-focused road car ever. The philosophy was simple. If it does not make the car faster, it gets thrown in the bin. They stripped out everything. Sound deadening was gone. Radio was gone. Who needs music when you have a 4-liter twin-turbo V8 screaming behind your head? They even made the passenger seat a $1 option, which was the most financially irresponsible flex I have ever seen. The hype machine went into overdrive. The most extreme McLaren ever, a 790 horsepower masterpiece of carbon fiber. They priced it at around $800,000 and it sold out instantly because rich people love having the most exclusive thing, even if that thing looked like a transformer stuck mid-transformation. The entire plan was genius. Take a legendary name, build an uncompromising machine, and let the wealthy fight over the limited run of 500 cars. What could possibly go wrong? As it turns out, building a car that is brilliant on a track but has to occasionally deal with traffic and parking lots presented a few tiny problems. The promise was perfection. The reality was a lot hotter than anyone expected. Now, let's talk about the design. Calling the Senna's looks controversial is like calling a hurricane a bit breezy. It looked like it was designed by an engineer who had only ever seen a picture of a car, and that picture was on a napkin that had gotten wet. The philosophy was function over form, but they took it to a level where the function was scaring children at car shows. Every surface, every vent, every wing was there for downforce. The active aerodynamics made the rear wing look like it was having a seizure, constantly twitching and flapping to find the perfect angle. It was less of a car and more of a science experiment that you could theoretically drive to get milk. And the interior? Oh man, they stripped it down to the absolute bare minimum. You got one seat as standard, the driver's seat obviously. The passenger seat cost $1, which we have established is a terrible business model. There was no radio, no sound deadening, no fancy leather. It was a carbon fiber bathtub with a steering wheel. The official line was purity. The reality was you were sitting in what felt like a very expensive go-kart. Early owners started complaining immediately. Strange rattles from the carbon tub, weird electrical gremlins, and a general feeling that things were not quite screwed together right. When you are paying $750,000, you expect the door handles to not feel like they came from a kid's toy. But here is where the real design compromises created vulnerabilities. All that extreme aero meant a labyrinth of ducts and channels to manage airflow and cool the monstrous engine. It was a system designed for 150 miles per hour blasts down the Mulsanne Strait, not for idling in Beverly Hills traffic on a hot day. The bodywork was so tightly packaged that working on anything required what felt like a team of surgeons. These were not just quirks, they were fundamental design choices that made the car incredibly fragile in the real world. They built a racetrack weapon, and assumed it would never have to deal with the mundane horror of a speed bump or a traffic jam. That assumption, as we were about to find out, was catastrophically wrong. Speaking of things going wrong, the whole operation was a production nightmare. The development timeline was rushed to meet the delivery promises made to all those wealthy buyers. The McLaren Production Center, which usually handles low-volume, meticulous builds, was suddenly under pressure to pump out 500 of the most complex cars they'd ever made. Leaked internal emails and documents later showed that employees were raising red flags. They were concerned about build quality, about parts not fitting correctly, about the sheer complexity of the God switch, the nickname for the button that gave you full power. The specialist build process, meant to guarantee perfection, was cracking under the pressure. They were trying to build a spaceship on an assembly line designed for sports cars, and the cracks were starting to show before the first car even left the factory. While the design team was busy creating a car that looked like it fell out of the ugly tree and hit every branch on the way down, the production team was living through their own version of hell. McLaren promised this ultra-exclusive, hand-built experience. What they delivered was more like a high-stakes game of Jenga, where all the blocks were made of carbon fiber and cost more than your house. The timeline was insane. They had to design, develop, and build 500 of the most complex road cars they'd ever attempted, all while the hype train was leaving the station. The McLaren Production Center in Woking is a beautiful facility, but it is not set up for speed. It is set up for meticulous, slow, perfect craftsmanship. Pushing that system to pump out Sennas was like trying to make a master sushi chef work the drive-thru at a fast food joint. The pressure was immense. There were stories of technicians working around the clock, of parts arriving that did not fit quite right, of the whole operation being held together by hope and a whole lot of overtime pay. And then there were the leaks. Internal documents and emails that later surfaced painted a picture of a company trying to put out fires before the cars even left the factory. Employees were raising concerns about the build quality, about electrical systems that were more temperamental than a Hollywood diva, and about the sheer number of custom one-off parts that had zero margin for error. The God switch, the button that unlocked the car's full terrifying potential, became a symbol of the problem. It was a system so complex and so sensitive that calibrating it correctly on every single car was a nightmare. They were building a car that was supposed to be a tribute to perfection, but the process to build it was anything but. The whole operation was a classic case of ambition outstripping execution, and the customers were about to become the unwilling beta testers. All of those production struggles were just the warm-up act for the main event, the cooling catastrophe. This is where the fundamental identity crisis of the Senna became a literal, burning issue. Remember, this car was designed by track engineers for track use. On a circuit, you have massive airflow constantly ramming into the front intakes, keeping the radiator and the twin turbocharged monster behind you nice and frosty. It is a beautiful, simple system. The problem, which apparently nobody at McLaren considered important, is that hypercars occasionally have to exist in the real world. A world that includes things like traffic lights, and drive-thrus, and valet parking. The engineering flaw was brutally simple. The cooling system was completely inadequate for low-speed, stop-and-go driving. When the car is not moving fast, there is no airflow. When there is no airflow, the heat from that 4-liter V8 has nowhere to go. It just starts baking everything around it. We are talking about components under the rear deck, turbochargers, exhaust manifolds, all the spicy bits, reaching temperatures they were never meant to see. It is like using a Formula One engine to power your lawnmower. It is going to overheat before you finish the front yard. Owners started reporting overheating warnings after just 20 minutes of city driving. The car would go into a limp mode, cutting power to try and save itself from melting into a puddle. McLaren's initial response was the classic corporate playbook, blame the user. They told owners they were misusing the car. They said the Senna was not designed for prolonged low-speed operation. That is, corporate speak for you, should not have tried to drive it on a road. It was a breathtakingly arrogant stance. You built a road-legal car, charged $750,000 for it, and then got mad when people tried to, drive it on roads. But the pattern kept growing. It was not just one guy who got stuck in traffic. Multiple owners across different climates were having the same issue. The incidents were stacking up, and they all shared the same factors: hot days, slow speeds, and a very expensive car throwing a temperature tantrum. The overheating was a clear warning sign, a symptom of a much bigger problem. It was the car's way of screaming that its track-focused DNA was fundamentally incompatible with the real world. And as we all know, if you ignore a warning sign for long enough, eventually you get a fire. And then, the overheating graduated from a warning to a full-blown crisis. Salomondrin's parking lot barbecue was not a one-off. It was just the most public example. Documented cases started popping up everywhere a wealthy person might take a hypercar outside fancy restaurants, in hotel valet lanes, at car meets. The common factors were always the same: prolonged low-speed driving followed by the car being shut off. That is when the real danger happened. With the engine off, the electric cooling pumps stop, but the turbochargers and exhaust components are still glowing hot, literally cherry red. With no airflow and no active cooling, that residual heat soaks into the engine bay, cooking anything flammable nearby: insulation, wiring looms, you name it. McLaren's response was not a recall. Instead, they initiated what they called customer care programs and technical updates. This is corporate jargon for, we will quietly fix your car if it is about to burn down your garage, but we are not going to tell anyone else about it. They would send a technician to your multi-million-dollar home to perform a secret surgery on your Senna. The updates often involved adding extra heat shielding, rerouting wiring harnesses away from the hottest areas, and updating software for the cooling fans. It was a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it was enough to keep most cars from spontaneously combusting. They exploited legal loopholes that classified these fixes as goodwill gestures rather than safety recalls, which saved them from the public relations nightmare and regulatory scrutiny of an official recall. It was a masterclass in damage control, but the owners who were in the know were starting to get seriously pissed off. You do not spend $750,000 on a car to be treated like you are in a secret beta test for a video game. The high-profile owners, the YouTubers, and the collectors started talking. An underground network of Senna owners formed, swapping horror stories and repair tips in private groups and on forums. They became amateur forensic engineers, comparing notes on which specific batch of cars had which problems, what the technical update actually involved, and how to spot the warning signs before your car turned into a very expensive bonfire. This community discovered fixes that McLaren would never publicly acknowledge. They found that certain aftermarket exhausts actually improved airflow and reduced under-hood temperatures. They shared techniques for a cool-down driving routine before shutting the car off, essentially having to baby a 790 horsepower monster like it was a temperamental classic car. The whole situation created a massive divide among owners. On one side, you had the hardcore track day enthusiasts who loved the Senna for what it was on a circuit, a brutally fast, uncompromising weapon. They were willing to put up with the nonsense because the performance was just that good. On the other side, you had the collectors. The guys who bought the Senna as a piece of automotive art, an investment to be displayed and occasionally driven to a Cars and Coffee. These guys were furious. They were not taking their cars to the track. They were dealing with overheating warnings on the way to a fancy dinner. This fury hit them right in the wallet. The early sellers, the ones who wanted out before the scandal got worse, took massive losses. A car that originally cost around $800,000 was suddenly changing hands for a lot less as the whispers about fires and reliability problems spread through the collector community. The very exclusivity that made the car desirable was now working against it. Every single fire and every overheated engine was a black mark against the entire tiny production run. McLaren had created a tribe of owners, but they had armed them with nothing but grievances and a shared sense of betrayal. The ultimate track car was creating its most intense battles not on the racetrack, but in the world of high-stakes collectibles and bruised egos. So what's the final verdict on the Senna? It's complicated. The scandal absolutely dented McLaren's reputation for bulletproof engineering, forcing a culture shift. But the car's sheer track performance was undeniable. Later models like the Elva and Speedtail learned from the cooling nightmare. For collectors, the controversy created a weird rarity, the problem child that might be more desirable precisely because of its messy history. The real victims were not the billionaires who could absorb the loss. It was the technicians facing their fury, and the second-hand buyers who inherited ticking time bombs. The Senna name itself became a cautionary tale about pushing boundaries too far. The pursuit of ultimate performance created a car that was a legend on track and a liability everywhere else. So what was the one thing that connected all of this? The overheating, the fires, the frantic software updates? It was not some exotic, impossible-to-find part. It was a simple design philosophy taken way too far. The entire car was built on a single, terrifying principle: save weight at all costs. That meant thinner heat shielding. That meant lighter, more compact cooling components. That meant pushing every system to its absolute thermal limit to avoid adding a single, performance-sapping pound. The smoking gun was the pursuit of a number, a dry-weight figure, over real-world reliability. Nobody at McLaren wanted to be the engineer who stood up and said, "Hey, maybe we should add 5 pounds of extra cooling or thicker insulation so this thing does not cook itself in traffic." That would have been admitting defeat against the very philosophy they were selling. The pursuit of extreme performance created a set of inevitable consequences. Sometimes the greatest tributes become the biggest warnings. The McLaren Senna is a monument to what happens when you chase a ghost so hard you forget to build a car that can survive the chase. If you want to see me roast another hypercar that tried and failed, click here. Make sure to subscribe so you can vote for what brand comes next.